Can stress cause diabetes? We know that stress can cause all sorts of health problems, but is it possible that it could contribute to the development of diabetes? Today we're going to talk about what stress is, what the stress response is, and we're going to talk about how all of this relates to the causative factors of diabetes. So before we're done today, you're going to have a clear picture of how it all works. Coming right up. I'm Dr. Ekberg. I'm a holistic doctor and a former Olympic decathlete. And if you'd like to truly master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure that you subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss anything. In the discussion about diabetes, about cause and prevention, we often hear things about diet, and we hear about weight, and we hear about exercise. But very rarely do we hear about stress. So let's talk about how that all works together. First of all, we want to talk about what is stress, because most people have a very limited idea of what stress is. We think of stress as feeling overwhelmed, feeling frustrated, having more things to do than there is time in the day, then that causes a feeling of stress, having multiple things going on at once. And yes, absolutely, that is stress, but stress is much, much more than that. Those things we talk about usually, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Stress is anything that increases the demand on the body. Anytime something happens that the body has to do something extra, that is stress. When the body detects, when your nervous system detects any sort of threat or anything that it has to deal with, anything it has to pay attention, anything it has to do something about, it creates a stress response. So it's not the stress that really matters. What matters is the stress response, because that's a physiological reaction. That's something that happens in the body. So let's say that we are having a picnic and we're enjoying our food, and then all of a sudden a grizzly bear comes charging across the field, heading straight for us. We are going to have a pretty strong stress response at this point, I would bet. So now our adrenals, first your nervous system detects the danger, then it starts sending messages for your body to ramp up its defenses. And now the adrenal glands have to start working harder. That's why adrenal glands are involved with stress, because adrenal glands make various hormones. The primary stress, the acute stress hormone, is called adrenaline. It is instantaneously acting. It is so important that it's fast that there are actually no synapses between the brain and the adrenal gland. So the adrenal gland is, in a sense, it's an extension of your nervous system. There are no connections in between. It has to happen that fast. And now when we release some adrenaline, then our heart rate goes up, because when the bear comes charging, we're going to have a lot of extra resources. We're going to run, we have to fight, we need more oxygen, more fuel. So the heart beats faster and the blood pressure goes up, because we need to move that blood faster, and that's what higher blood pressure does. We're also going to get an increase in muscle tension. So when we get ready to jump and run, we need some muscle tone. So the body starts preparing that instantaneously. And it dominates the muscle tension in the flexors, in the things that bend and protect us on the front of the body. So we bend our arms kind of like in a defensive posture. We pull our shoulders up to the ears to protect the neck. We clench our jaw to protect the teeth and the jaw. So all of these, if you've noticed people being tense when they're stressed, these are all stress responses. And even if there's no grizzly bear around at the time, if we have any form of significant stress, we're going to exhibit those same behaviors because it's built in. We're wired that way. Then we're going to also have some other things happening, like we're going to get an increase in LDL. The body is going to upregulate the LDL production because low-density lipoprotein cholesterol is necessary for repairs. And if we have a fight, if we have a bear, if we have some thorny bushes, if we get injured during the fight, then the body wants to repair that as soon as possible. So it upregulates that LDL because LDL cholesterol is part of wound healing. It's part of every cell membrane. So if we're going to repair those, we need that stuff. So we don't really have a choice. This happens instantaneously. And why does the body do that? Well, it's to keep us alive, obviously. And stress and stress responses are not a bad thing. They help us survive. The people who have lost this ability, people who have Addison's disease, their adrenals are completely shot, they're sitting ducks. They have no ability to respond to stress, and it is very, very dangerous. But for our purposes, what we want to talk about today is cortisol. This kicks in just a few seconds later. The first step happens in milliseconds, but a few seconds later, the body also increases cortisol production because when we have a fight, when we have an increased need, whether it's real or imagined, then we're going to want more energy, which means more blood sugar. And cortisol, the purpose of cortisol is to increase blood sugar. And why is that interesting for diabetes? Because we have, in diabetes, it's about blood sugar, it's about insulin, and it becomes about cortisol because cortisol raises blood sugar and therefore it also triggers insulin. The thing to understand about stress, though, is that, like we said, it's usually underestimated what stress is. We think of it as just emotional stress, but stress is when your physiology responds. And you have something called the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic is your stress response. That's the fight-flight. And the other branch, the other half of that autonomic nervous system is the parasympathetic, which is your feed-breed. It's your healing side. So today, though, we're just going to talk about the sympathetic and to understand that you don't have to feel it to have a stress response. That any time that your sympathetic nervous system kicks in, any time that you have an increase in heart rate, increase in blood pressure, increase in muscle tension, you are having a stress response, whether you think you do, whether you're aware of it or not. And this could be an acute stressor, it could be something that you have experienced recently, or it could be a past trauma. It could be something that was very, very significant, very severe, very enduring, that even though you got past it, it sort of lodged in the body. It became a habit, that it lasted so long, it became sort of like your default baseline. And these traumas could be of a physical nature, it could be a physical trauma, it could be an emotional trauma, or it could be a chemical trauma, it could be a poisoning, could be chemotherapy, could be a long-standing exposure to something toxic. So any of these things can cause a sympathetic reaction, a fight-flight response, could cause a stress response. And again, most of these we're not aware of. Probably 80% of these stress responses that change physiology, that change these things, they go by completely unnoticed, either because we're not paying attention or because it's just so familiar to us, that it's just been that way for so long that that's just the way it is. And when we have these chronic stresses, when we develop a chronic stress pattern, also called a sympathetic dominance, we tend to produce cortisol at a higher level for longer periods of time, like a higher baseline activity. And they've done some studies where they give healthy people who are not insulin resistant, they're very insulin sensitive, they inject cortisol into their bodies. Also, the medical version of that, the drug version, is called cortisone. And within days to weeks, they have measurable changes in insulin resistance and they start gaining weight, even if they never had a problem with that before. And there's probably thousands of you watching who have been on cortisone. You had some sort of pain or inflammation and they gave you cortisone or prednisone or one of those zones. And that's just a synthetic version of cortisol, and it will raise blood sugar. Even though the purpose of it is to control inflammation, it will raise blood sugar, it will increase insulin resistance, and it will increase weight. So a lot of you probably recognize that pattern, even if you didn't know it before, that your blood sugar went crazy, you gained weight, and you might even have become diabetic or pre-diabetic as a result. So this is very well documented, but it's rarely given the attention that it deserves. So that's what stress is. That's what a stress response is. It's a sympathetic activation. It's an activation of the sympathetic portion of your nervous system, whether you're aware of it or not. Now, what are the causative factors of diabetes? Well, diabetes is the late stage result. It's the far gone version of insulin resistance. And insulin resistance is when the cells of your body resist insulin. Why would they do that? Because you've had too much insulin for a long period of time trying to put blood sugar out of the bloodstream and into the cell, and the cell doesn't want it, and this has been going on for a while. The cells start resisting. So the variables, the causative factors for diabetes are blood sugar. When blood sugar goes up, insulin goes up. If that happens a lot, the cells become resistant eventually. And so blood sugar and insulin go together, and now we understand, based on what we talked about, that cortisol, because the purpose of cortisol is to raise blood sugar, it will stimulate insulin, it will increase insulin resistance. Those are the basic causative factors, the variables involved. And very, very often in the discussion, we hear that, oh, well, you just need to control your calories and you just need to lose weight and you need to eat low fat and all these things. But they have it backwards, because dietary fat, we've been scared, it's been demonized. We have a fat phobia because we see the fat on the body, so we think that the fat on the body is the cause, and we think that it's about calories. But dietary fat does not trigger insulin. It is almost a zero insulin response. It's like 1% of what a carbohydrate would be. So dietary fat does not cause this. And what about body fat? We see the fat on the body and we associate overweight people have more diabetes. That's called a correlation. And then they say that, well, you should lose some weight, and then typically diabetes gets better because they see thinner people have less diabetes. But again, they get it backwards. It's not the cause, it's the effect. Body fat is not the cause of insulin resistance, it's the result of insulin resistance. So we have to start understanding it's not all that complicated. It's very, very basic physiological principles. Blood sugar goes up, insulin goes up, cells start resisting. So the things that increase blood sugar are the ones to avoid. So then back to the question, can stress cause diabetes? Because we know cortisol raises blood sugar, which can drive insulin resistance, but can it really cause diabetes in and of itself? So I think it is unlikely that if that was the only problem that would cause diabetes. But with everything else that's going on, with the majority of the population already having some degree of insulin resistance, now stress becomes a very, very significant factor. So we want to look at the lifestyle factors, and diet is huge. Genetics is huge, but we don't really have much influence over what we got. We can express it differently through diet, activity, and stress. But these are the things that we have to work with: diet, activity, and stress levels. So one by itself, they're all important. And if you already have sort of a tendency, then any one of these will push you over the edge. So if you're pre-diabetic and you keep eating lots of carbohydrates and you have a sedentary lifestyle and you have a lot of stress, then it's very, very likely that you will become diabetic. And if you just change one of them, you're not doing as much for yourself as if you improved all three of them. And then the question, of course, is how do you reduce stress? How do you reduce cortisol? And that's a huge, big topic. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail, so let's just very briefly mention that a stable blood sugar is key, because anytime your blood sugar is low, if you're hypoglycemic, if you are depending on a carbohydrate metabolism and you skip a meal, now your cortisol is going to have to kick in and raise that blood sugar, and now you're having that stress. If you are fat adapted, it's not a problem to miss a meal because you don't rely on blood sugar to the same degree. So stable blood sugar, being fat adapted, having a low carb lifestyle is key in controlling this. And then of course reducing stress. So regular sleep, meditation, relaxation, breathing exercises, all of those are fantastic things, and we'll talk more about them in other videos, but it's just too big a topic for this one here. Breathing exercises are very powerful. I've done a couple of videos on that specifically to explain how that works. The key with a breathing exercise to reduce stress is to make the in-breath and the out-breath about the same length. They should be about 4 to 5 seconds, and the out-breath should be, if anything, just a little bit longer than the in-breath. But most people breathe 18 to 20 times per second. And when we need to relax, when we do a therapeutic relaxation, we need to slow that down to about 6 breaths a minute to get this effect. And then of course any other lifestyle changes. If you have a job that's really, really stressful, then you either need to do more of this, or you need to figure out maybe if you can find another job or another situation in life. So we can do certain things to change our environment and our adaptation, and then the rest of it becomes to improve the body's health so that it can deal with this. We have done some other videos on brain and stress, and I'll do some more on that specifically. If you enjoy this information and you'd like to learn more about how the body really works and how to get as healthy as possible, make sure that you check out our other videos on insulin resistance, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.